People who can speak multiple languages. What language do you think in? I'm fluent in English. Vietnamese is my mother tongue. Speak a little French. I mainly think in English since I moved to US, but my dreams come in Vietnamese still. French when I speak French. English when I speak English. Sometimes English when I speak French. I'm French though. That's weird. Sometimes it's faster to just think in English rather than French, it seems. I mean, the numbers alone. First language, Danish. Second language, English. Third language, German. It switches between Danish and English. Edit. Rip my inbox. Edit 2. Thank you, kind stranger, for my first silver. Does it mix like every other word? Words are complete thoughts, then the next is a different language? It's interesting to see so many people with English as their second or third language and they only think in English. Interesting stuff. Probably because so much content is published in English. My first language, Romanian. Second, German. Third, English. My brain. Fuck your mother language, let's go with English. Does it switch around or is it mostly just English? I am fluent in both Spanish and English, but I only think in English, lol. Is it your original language or is Spanish? Spanish is my first language, but I don't really think in it much at all. Really? Interesting. It really is. I always think in English, though I rarely ever use it in my daily conversations. I can think in them all. When I'm speaking a language, I think in that language even if I'm not 100% fluent. When I'm not speaking, I generally think in one of two languages I'm a native speaker in. I don't consciously control it. Sometimes I'm surrounded by one language and my brain randomly starts thinking in the other, but usually I'll think in the language I last used. I'm currently learning Swedish and it's gotten to the point where if I see an object, the Swedish word for it pops into my head before the English word does. It's a good thing. I am trying to become fluent. I often practice a lot of Swedish to myself. I sometimes practice on my boyfriend too. He's actually Swedish, but I'm still too embarrassed to try and have a full-blown Swedish conversation with "Hi, monsieur." One day. I am a slow learner, but I'm in the long game, and if I can become at least somewhat fluent in it, I'll be happy. While I was in seminary at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, there was a professor there who was very skilled in languages. For example, he was planning a trip to Turkey to study something, and someone asked him why he was reading a book in German, and he said, the best book on some specific part of the Turkish language is written in German. There was a story that might have been urban legend, but one day he was walking across the quad and the school president stopped him and said, "Dr. Gentry, how are things going?" Quote, "I'm disappointed." Why? Quote, "Because I know 9 languages, but can only think in 5 of them, monsieur." Asterisk asterisk edited to add. Single quote. School. Asterisk asterisk. Wow, so Erdogan himself asked him how things are going. Just casually friends with Turkey's president, no biggie. I started off thinking in English and then translating Spanish into English in my head. It took a lot of effort. The weirdest thing was when I started knowing words in Spanish that I didn't know in English. And then it was weird again when I started understanding Spanish words and sentences without having to consciously translate them into English. First it was like I would hear someone say something in Spanish and the understanding of the whole meaning of the sentence would pop into my head the same way as when someone said something in English. I learned English much earlier in life, so that's my default. But if I'm hearing Spanish or listening to Spanish music or media, or even sometimes when I'm not, there are a lot of times when I think in Spanish, too. And honestly, I kind of prefer thinking in Spanish. But I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's that the music is better? I'm learning Spanish and the first time a sentence just made sense, and I didn't have to translate it in my head was pretty cool. Or when I started to just be able to say things I wanted, and not think about the monsieur. My first language is Swedish, but I'm fluent in English and pretty much only speak English at home. I can also understand Danish and Norwegian and speak a bit of French. I mostly think and dream in English unless I've been speaking, reading a lot of Swedish, or if I'm doing stuff where my vocabulary is lacking in English. I knew it, Scandinavians know a lot of languages. As a Swede, I wouldn't say I completely know Norwegian and Danish. But there is so much overlap between all three languages, so it's usually quite easy to understand them unless they have a very thick accent. Cough cough. Danish people cough cough. My first language is Portuguese and I can speak a little bit of Spanish and I'm fluent in English. I'm not surrounded by people talking in English whatsoever, yet I mostly think in English. It makes no sense to me, but oh well. I've always wondered but never asked. Are Portuguese and Spanish similar languages? Like, do they share words, sounds, that sort of thing? Yes. We share some words and sounds, and we can usually understand each other with just a little bit of effort, even if we don't know how to properly say something. Although some regions in Spain talk waay too fast. With that in mind, I'd say it can be somewhat offensive when people just assume it's all the same, because at the end of the day they are two different languages. So I'm glad you asked. I'm Anglo and my French is fading, but when I'm super pissed I swear in Canadian French, if only in my head. I forced myself to think in Dutch when I was learning it. It's a good way to speed up learning a language. French Canadian swear words are the best and most effective. Emo. Tabarnak to calisse. I consider myself to be fairly fluent in English. My thoughts partially switched to it when I was around 17 years old. I had been speaking a little English since I was 3, but I started, seriously, studying the language only when I turned 16. Currently, my inner monologue is both in English and in my native language. When I'm giving a speech in my head, discussing some concept with myself, I usually think in English. On the other hand, my inner voice uses my native language for the most of the mundane things. Like my exams are tomorrow. Yet here I am, browsing Reddit. Also, on some rare occasions, I hear nothing and just know what I'm thinking about. Loving this thread because it's sort of blowing my mind. Also, everyone in this thread chose to think in English to comment, edit, grammar. To be fair, people who browse an English-speaking site are more likely to be consuming mostly English media. I speak Portuguese, English, Spanish, and German. In my house, multiple languages were spoken in a mix at all times. Words in sentence weren't exactly from the same language. When I speak with my family like that, I think in no language in particular, and it's second nature. When just speaking a single language at a time, I typically think in that language. When it comes to counting, it's mostly German. I live in America now. Fluent in English, French, Bosnian, and Dutch. I always think in French. I was born and raised in France, so it's personally what I find more comfortable. Now this is a fucking question. And this is not a fucking answer. Baby talk would definitely help if you're in tech support. A combination of all the languages I speak, though the one I'm predominantly using at that point in my life takes precedence. For example, a thought I had earlier was, what have I forgotten? J'ai dû faire quelque chose. J'ai dû, French. I had to. Faire quelque chose, Italian. Do something. Or, quote, penso che ho. Laissez la clé. Key. Quote. Which is a horrible Italian dash French hybrid that sums up my thinking quite well. Or I might be greeting someone and my first instinct is to sew it French. But I'll have to switch last minute to the language I should be using with a monsieur. It's messy and annoying but pretty cool. Honestly, I speak multiple languages and don't think there is one language that dominates my thoughts. To be honest, it's either a mixture of various phrases that express what I'm feeling quite well, or no language at all. More like ideas, concepts, images, Same with dreams. I can remember talking to someone and the topics of conversation, but not the language that was spoken. Language is just the outlet to express things, and if it wasn't somehow relevant to what was happening, I don't remember. Yeah, you come to associate the same words in different languages with different things. Una forchetta is different to a fork, and most of the time thinking in abstract ideas and images is easier than that jumbled mess of languages. In all of them is you're also in pictures, animations, music. I don't think in words. Am I understanding correctly that people usually narrate their thoughts in their head? Is it like the dog in a dog's life? I think in thoughts. They're not words, not images, not sounds. I don't know how to describe them except as thoughts. The translation into words can happen really fast, but it's a separate process. It may be interesting and relevant here, but when I remember someone saying something, I seem to remember it in the language I'm speaking at the moment, not the language they originally said it in. I think that's because the memory is actually of the fundamental meaning as I understood it, not the string of words. But I can pull that up into either of the languages I speak, and it feels like remembering, not like translating. I wish there were more research on the differences in thinking. Thank God. I was looking for this thread and I'm happy I found it. I usually think in images, animations, the abstract concepts or ideas without attaching it to language necessarily. Of course there are some topics that are inherently related to language, and then I think about specific phrases, words that describe them as you're with past conversations, dreams, thought processes. I remember the contents and topics, but not necessarily the language, except if it was relevant to the topic at hand. When I wake up in the morning, I don't think the sentence, I don't want to wake up. I just have that feeling of annoyance and tiredness. Maybe visualize something like me being stupid and going to bed late last night or the day ahead, but without having that sentence float around in my brain. If I stubbed my toe somewhere, I might curse, but I think that's more something that I started doing because other people did it to express pain. I'm Dutch, but when I was young, 6 to 10 years old, I was online talking English so much that I was getting better in it than Dutch. And I eventually started thinking and taking notes for school in English. Even though my English isn't as good as before, I still always think in English thanks to this. Landveriter. Ooh, something I can help with. I'm American. I've always spoken English. My parents both can speak other languages, and taught me a bit of Japanese growing up. But for all intents and purposes, I spoke only English until high school, when I had to take a foreign language. I chose French because I was 14 and thought it might be useful on dates. It wasn't. However, my best friend was in the same class and pressured me to do 4 years of French with high Monsieur. He was a lot more motivated than I was, even though we both got good grades. Anyway, the summer before our senior year, we have AP French homework. This isn't like a few pages of worksheets though. No, this is like full research projects and essays. One day I wake up and there's 2 weeks left of summer, and I haven't done any French yet. So I start putting in crazy hours working on French and only French. It's 8 hours a day of studying and working, and it's a struggle since I'm not the best student. But a few days before school starts, something different happens. I wake up ready for another exhausting day of French. Only it's not another day. It's asterisk un autre jour. Quel dollar asterisk. I'm thinking in French. I've been working in it so much that my brain's been wired for French now. That kind of changed how I think about things now. I wouldn't consider myself fluent in French, but it's taught me the importance of immersion. Taking a challenging college course. Don't distract yourself with YouTube. Put more time in your studies to get yourself thinking about that more. It's been super helpful, having a way of changing my mindset like that. TLDR, if you've never learned a foreign language, try. It changes the way you think. That's crazy. I hope I'm like that in the coming years of French. I'm currently taking French too. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.